and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I am Taylor Rockwell. No Daryl Grove on this show. He will be joining me later on this evening for a quick take, hot take review of the USA v Trinidad and Tobago World Cup Qualifier to help me preview that game and maybe look ahead a little bit to the USA-Mexico game, which I know we're not supposed to do. Bruce Arena has said that, but we're going to do that anyway. I've got ESPN's Jeff Carlisle. We talked the USA's strategy heading into that Trinidad and Tobago game, who might start, who might sit, what the tactical variations might be, if we see a back three. All that to be discussed. Plus, as I said, a little bit about that Mexico game, what it's like to be in the Azteca, how intimidating that atmosphere truly is. Lots on the show. So, without further ado, here's Jeff. Joining me now, I've got Jeff Carlisle, senior soccer writer for ESPN. Jeff, thanks so much for coming back on the show.
Hey, no problem, Taylor. How are you?
Doing well. A little nervous, not so much for the Trinidad game, but a little bit more so for the Mexico game. But since Trinidad is first, I suppose we should start there. So I wanted to see how you were feeling about Trinidad and maybe what you were thinking about this U.S. team, what your expectations were heading into this game.
I think the U.S. is in a pretty good spot, especially in terms of health. I mean, when you think back to the last round of qualifiers, it seemed like they were dealing with a ton of injuries, and now all those guys are healthy. The possible exception being John Brooks, but he's trained the last couple of days, so that quad injury that he got against Venezuela, seems to be healing. I think the only real worry is, is the team looking ahead to Mexico? I mean, that's, whenever you have a double fixture date and Mexico's in it, I mean, that naturally gets a lot of the attention and focus. But, Bruce Arena, the players, they're saying, hey, we're not even thinking about Mexico right now. All our focus is on Trinidad. And I think they understand that, this is the game that they really have to win. I mean, if they get anything in Mexico, then that's a bonus. But they really need to take care of business at home, beat Trinidad. That's really one of the teams that they got to, try to they're in front of them right now, and it needs to stay that way. So, they need to try to, climb up the standings themselves. So, Trinidad's a team that they've had a lot of success against in the past. They've usually handled them pretty easily at home, but, every game is different. And, Trinidad's got some players, like Jovan Jones, Kevin Molino, Kenwin Jones. Those guys on their day can be pretty dangerous. So, I think the U.S. is confident but wary, but I expect them to get 3 points.
And so, looking at that TNT team for a second, so do you think it is going to be sort of a sitting back, playing deep, bunkering and defending and countering, or do you expect to see any sort of maybe wrinkles in there or surprises from Trinidad?
Yeah, I think it's going to be much like the Venezuela game. I mean, they're going to get men behind the ball as quickly as they can and really try to use their athleticism and their speed on the counterattack. Guys like Jovan Jones are very pacey and can get into the final third quickly. So, I think that's something the U.S. is going to have to be mindful of. So tactically, that's really what I'm expecting. And I think for the U.S., for them, when the ball turns over and they get possession, I think they need to work to get the ball into the attacking third a little bit more quickly than they did against Venezuela. They were a little plodding at times.
Yeah.
And, who knows if that's getting used to the altitude or just not wanting to risk things. But they need to crank up the quality in terms of their attack if they're going to get a result in this game.
Yeah, Daryl, my co-host, and I had a disagreement, I'll say, about the Venezuela game. I was pretty negative on it. I didn't really like a lot of what I saw from the U.S. He was a bit more positive. I'm curious if you think we'll see roughly that same team come out against Trinidad. Do you think they will go with essentially the strongest possible 11 they can and not risk anybody or worried about yellow card accumulation ahead of that Mexico game?
Yeah, I mean, this is the game that I think matters the most. I think one change that you'll likely see is that Josie Altidore will come in for Bobby Wood. Historically, Altidore has done very well against Trinidad. I think 5 of his 16 World Cup qualifying goals are against Trinidad. So, I expect him to be in the lineup. And I think he and Dempsey have a good understanding, a good relationship. They played together quite a bit. That was the strike partnership for a lot of the last cycle. So, I think that's the one big change. I mean, otherwise, I think it pretty much stays the same. There is a question of whether Christian Pulisic stays central or is a little bit more out wide. But, we'll see what happens. I think, just gut feeling, I think he'll stay central. But it's going to be up to Michael Bradley to maybe stay a little bit so intense on taking the ball right off the foot of the center backs. I mean, Jeff Cameron and John Brooks, if he plays, are guys who are pretty adept on the ball. So I don't know if that's necessarily required by Bradley to go that deep. But and if he stays up a little bit higher, I think it's going to be easier to connect with guys like Nagbe, Pulisic, and Fabian Johnson. So, but I think it'll be pretty similar, and I think they'll try to field their strongest lineup.
So against that Venezuela team, you said you felt they were a little bit plotting. I am inclined to agree. Do you think that was mostly Michael Bradley coming too deep? Do you think that if you get him a little bit further forward, that will change? Or do you think there's other things the U.S. needs to do to look aggressive to get a result against what I'm assuming is going to be a fairly defensive team?
Yeah, I think it's not just Michael Bradley. I thought, Fabian Johnson kind of struggled to really, fire up the legs and get into the attack quickly. It seemed like he was holding back a little bit. So, I think things like when you see things like that, the whole altitude thing, kind of getting acclimated to that, it does have a little bit of credence, but that didn't also seem to stop Venezuela from getting into the attack quickly. So, I think that's a concern. So I think it's not just Michael Bradley coming too deep. I think there needs to be a team-wide mindset that, they're going to try to really get at Trinidad as quickly as they can. Otherwise they're going to be facing a 10-man defense, with Kenwyn Jones kind of lurking around up top, to be an outlet on their counterattack. And that's, a scenario that the U.S. at times has struggled with. They were a little bit better in the second half against Venezuela. Obviously Christian Pulisic got that goal. But, I think it's more a team-wide attitude. And Bruce Arena in his press conference on Wednesday, said that, he was going to tweak some things. And so, we'll see if those changes work.
And do you think we will still see, because I agree with you, Fabian Johnson looked a little bit sloppy to me. It looked a little bit like maybe he was still coming back from injury or wasn't quite at the sharpness we'd like to see. Do you think there's any chance we see any rotation with him? I've seen some speculation that he might be on the left-hand side, maybe Darlington Nagbe sits. It seems likely that it will kind of be that same attacking three that you mentioned of Nagbe, Pulisic, and Johnson, but I'm wondering if you think there could be any variation there.
Depends on where Pulisic, ultimately gets deployed.
Yeah.
If he's central, then I think you'll see the same. I think you'll see both Nagbe and Johnson. But if he's pushed out wide and they bring in someone like a Kellen Acosta into the middle to partner Bradley, one of Johnson and Nagbe is going to have to make way. And I would predict that it would be Nagbe, just because it's almost kind of in the hope that you'll have a Fabian Johnson close to his peak. So, but we'll see what Arena ultimately decides. But I have a feeling that Pulisic will be in the middle and kind of keep it the same in that front.
So a big narrative has been, looking at this game, has been not looking past this game to that Mexico game, but that's exactly what I want to do now while I've got you here. Because I know, like Arena said, we're not looking past Trinidad. We're focused on them. As soon as the final whistle goes, then we'll look at Mexico. And I understand that in theory, except that all of these, like the warm-up game, this qualifier against Trinidad, they're being played at altitude to deal with the Azteca. You have covered games at the Azteca, right. So I wanted to I've never been there, so I wanted to kind of hear what it is like to be there, what that atmosphere is like, both in terms of the atmosphere of the fans and also the atmosphere in terms of not being able to breathe.
Well, I can't really speak to the not being able to breathe part because I'm not doing any running. But, it's an imposing venue. I mean, excuse me, the stands, they almost go straight up. I mean, it's tier upon tier of stands, and it's just, you kind of feel, where some venues it kind of has an open air feel. I mean, this almost has a kind of a claustrophobic feel. And it's just an immense stadium. And, obviously when Mexico gets its fans in there, it can be really intimidating. I think one advantage the U.S. does have is this game is being played at night. And that tends to mitigate, obviously it's cooler, the air is a little bit cleaner. And so, I think that's going to help the U.S. quite a bit. It seems like whenever they were playing that game in the daytime, the U.S. would really wilt. I think especially during, the 2010 cycle, the U.S. went up in that game through Charlie Davies and then couldn't manage to see it through. So, it is tough to breathe. But I think the acclimatization program that the U.S. has undergone is really going to help them in that regard. And again, just to get back to the time of day that this game is being played, I think that helps the U.S. And there's some Mexico players who aren't used to playing at altitude. A lot of them play in Europe now. Think about Chicharito and Herrera. I mean, those guys have not been at altitude either. So, I mean, I think you're seeing a steady erosion in the home field advantage that Mexico has typically enjoyed at that venue. But Mexico's still a talented team. I mean, they've proven that they can beat the U.S. pretty much anywhere. They've beaten them at the Rose Bowl. They've beaten them in Columbus recently. So just their talent alone is going to make this a difficult proposition. But, it's a tough venue without a doubt.
All right. Well, I know we got to get you going because battery life is an issue, but I had one more question for you. It does seem like a lot of people are saying Trinidad is a must-win, got to get 3 points here. If we get anything against Mexico, that's wonderful. And it does feel like a lot of people think maybe this one's a little bit of a foregone conclusion. With that in mind, and knowing that there are maybe a couple little injury concerns, there are the yellow card issues. I think it's Altidore, Beasler, Brooks, Cameron, and Bradley are all on a yellow. If they get one against Trinidad, they're suspended. Right. So do you think there's a chance that sets up the possibility of Arena experimenting a little bit? Maybe we do see a back three against Mexico, because if it is this sort of if we get anything, we're lucky, then does that lend itself towards, then we can try some different stuff? Or do you think Bruce Arena is going to Bruce Arena, and it's going to be back four, it's going to be the way we're expected to play, and it's going to be trying to grind out a result?
I think it's going to be a back four. Obviously, a back three was tried against Mexico back last year, and that did not work very well. Some of that was familiarity, but I think personnel-wise, just with the flank play that Mexico has, I just think a back three is very difficult. I think we saw the back three. The reason we saw a back three against Venezuela is because, what do you do if you're late in the Trinidad game and you do need a goal? Okay, then you have that option of going to a back three and really trying to apply pressure to Trinidad. So I think that's why we saw that formation. I would be surprised if we saw that against Mexico. I think it's going to be the U.S.'s turn to kind of, not necessarily bunker in, but make sure that they're defensively solid. And I think the best way to do that is, to kind of have those two rows of four and maybe some help from one of the forwards as well. So, I think, you might see some changes in personnel because obviously 2 games in 4 days at altitude is a tough proposition, and that's going to take its toll on some guys. So, I think, maybe with some of the wing attackers, you might see some rotation there. You might see some rotation up top. Obviously Bobby Wood is healing, from that injury that he had late in the season. So I think he's a guy that can give you a lot of minutes, and he's a pest too. I mean, he's a guy that can really harass a back line. And he's got a good nose. He's got a good nose for goal, and he's shown that he can score against Mexico. So he's got a good track record there. So I think you'll see some rotation on that particular front. And we'll see what happens. I mean, Bruce Arena's come up with some wrinkles before, so we'll see what he has in store.
Indeed. Well, so what does your near future look like? Are you traveling for any of these games? Are you already traveling for these games, or are you going to be staying at home and watching?
I was in Salt Lake City for Venezuela, and now I'm in Denver. So, I'll be there for the game on Thursday, and then Friday I travel to Mexico City.
Nice.
So I'll be there, for my third Azteca game, and I've never seen them lose.
There we go.
So
that's what I want to hear. That's what I want to hear, Jeff.
The first one was the win. The first one was the win, and then the World Cup qualifier that was 0-0. So it's me personally, I have a pretty good track record there.
So what I'm hearing is if the United States doesn't get a win or a draw, we should hold you personally responsible?
Yeah, it's all my fault. It always is. Come on, man. You know that by now.
Yeah, I guess I should know that by now. Good point. Well, Jeff, thank you thank you very much. I know you're very busy. I know you've got a lot going on. But if people want to hear more about you, read more about your work, or read your work, I guess, how can they do so?
Online, www.espnfc.com.
I've heard of ESPN.
You can find my work, and then at Jeffrey Carlisle on Twitter. So not Jeff Carlisle, at Jeffrey Carlisle.
There we go.
When I got on Twitter way back when, Jeff Carlisle was already taken, so I had to improvise. But that's where they can find me.
All right, Jeff. Thanks so much for taking the time, and good luck. I hope you don't get too much blame.
All right, thanks.
Thank you again to Jeff for coming on the show. I think he was one of the first journalists we had when we first started the show in 2009, 2010, so always good to catch up with him. A quick update about what we're going to be doing with the rest of the week and the start of next week, just so everybody's in the know. As I said earlier, tonight Daryl and I are going to do a quick take, hot take review of the USA-Trinidad game and maybe look a little bit towards that Mexico World Cup qualifier. Daryl is in Spain, so he's staying up late / waking up early, I think staying up late for the entire night to watch that game. So he might be a little fatigued, but, that's the sacrifice he's willing to make. Then on Friday's show, we are scheduled to have Tom Marshall, who's been on the program before. He is an expert when it comes to all things Mexico soccer, so we look forward to discussing the USA-Mexico World Cup Qualifier with him. And on Monday, Matt Doyle is booked, so he will be there to help us break down that Mexico qualifier. I think I just broke the record for a number of times I've said Mexico in like a 15-second space, but I'm fine with that because that's how we roll. So until then, thank you all very much for listening, and I look forward to being back in your earballs later on this evening, probably closer to like 11 p.m. or 12 midnight with that quick take, hot take review. Hopefully sooner, we shall see. Until then, thank you all again, and goodbye from us.